Welcome back, Northview Church, here again with Pastor CJ to talk about open heart, where we heard you this weekend just talk about how from the heart flows all things, reveals a lot about our character. Yeah. So why don't we talk about that?
Yeah, so much of God's prompting in our life is internally focused. I mean, he is hyper attentive to our character development. Mm-hmm. You know, one thing you'll hear me say all the time is God cares so much more about our character and our conduct than he does with our comfort and our convenience. And so a lot of times it is asking the question, what is God trying to do in my character right now? Mm-hmm. And I do think as you go through scripture cover to cover, you find that there are three characteristics or attributes of godliness that kind of seem to be prioritized, or if anything, all other characteristics flow through those three channels, and they are integrity, humility, and generosity. Mm-hmm. And I just think that is, again, why generosity is so brilliant, but also just is so healthy. You know, what takes place internally in our lives as we, you know, develop an open heart towards generosity. It's pretty significant what it accomplishes in our heart and in our lives.
Mm-hmm. I get to work with all of our global partners with being in my role here, but one of our partners...
she's downplaying it. Katie is a giant on our team, and this one individual oversees so much of what we do missions.
If you want to go on a trip, email me.
For sure, you definitely should. Katie is a machine, and we're blessed to have her on our team.
Well, and you know what, though? Northview Church is incredibly generous. People don't realize all the impact that happens around the world because of your generosity. So thank you guys for all the ways that you give. But
what are some of the things that, like, when you are working with partners or you're on a trip, and this is unscripted, so give Katie some grace because I'm putting her on the spot, but what are some of the thoughts that come to your mind in terms of generosity while working with missions?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind is, you mentioned like character being a big piece of, what you see out of the heart, and poverty alleviation efforts are really most effective if you're able to start with like the core. Like we have a ministry partner that always says, to empower the person, you have to empower the mind. You have to empower first to get them out of poverty. You have to empower them first as a human. A human is made in God's image. A human has gifts and skills and talents that reflect his character. They're not powerless. They have resources at their disposal, and giving people to see that and then coming together as a community to work towards a goal can get them actually to a place of being out of poverty, but doing it because they were collectively working together and because they were using the resources and gifts that God's given them. And so I feel like I see that at Northview Church too, of like when we're collectively working together and living in a way that's generous, saying this all is going towards a goal. For our partners overseas, the goal is like getting out of poverty and then beyond. But for us, it could be, fulfilling God's mission for Northview, building kingdom culture, building kingdom realities in like places around the world, but also in our own communities. Yeah. And so, the whole like empowerment piece of it, when it comes to character, it really you do have to like go back to how is this individual person experiencing and viewing themselves in light of the gospel, in light of what God has like created them to be. It leads to so many other things, including like generous living. Yeah.
What's interesting to me about that is, and as a pastor for so many years, every time I've been a part of a missions trip, we sent out teams. It never seems to fail. Every time these teams go out and they have a tremendous impact on different parts of the world. Mm-hmm. But 100% of the time, I just have not experienced a single time where the individuals didn't come back impacted themselves. Yeah. In fact, you could argue that a mission trip impacts the person
100%
more than the partnership.
There's mutual discipleship.
Yeah.
We're always saying that. Like you are going because like God has called you to this and you have things to offer, but you're going to learn and to be discipled as well by the people that you're serving, by the people that you're interacting with.
Yeah, and I think you come back from a trip, and if you've never been on a trip again, Katie is your person, and the team that she serves on is constantly working around the clock to really send out troops and get boots on the ground all over the world. But there's something about you come back and you just know, even if you don't have the language for it, that was good for my soul. Mm-hmm. That was just good for my soul. And I think as you lean into a life of generosity, you have that resounding thought often. Mm-hmm. Man, this is just good for my soul. And I would encourage you, if you're not giving, to just consider how a life of generosity might be good for your soul and how it might foster a greater level of godliness and character in your life. And so I just think it's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. People are always, I think whether you're serving overseas or just serving and interacting here with people locally, you often see that those without material wealth tend to live very generously. There's almost like this bind that wealth can have on a person where their money and their like possessions have given them what the Lord is meant to give a person. Yeah. And so then when you go overseas or when you go, to an area of poverty here locally and you see someone isn't bound by that, suddenly there's like this reality and dependence on the Lord and like a drive to serve those around them. That is like, I don't even know. It's just crazy that like wealth can actually like hinder our ability to be generous.
Oh, it's again, I know I shared last week about my journey into the ministry and things that I just had to learn and some really naive assumptions that I had. This idea that everyone loves generosity. Well, I found that wasn't the case. The other thing that I discovered was it's not the wealthy who give. In fact, there are studies done on the church across our nation, even around the world, and this is a consistent theme. It's not the wealthy who give. What you find in Scripture, and in the book of Corinthians, it says each one of us should decide within our heart what we should give. So one, that's telling us giving is a heart's decision. But two, giving reveals your heart's condition. And I find that it's not the wealthy who give, it's the healthy who give. And I think one of the greatest indicators of a healthy heart is a generous person. And so that, again, puts the ball in every single one of our courts to really do the hard work of discernment and personal assessment and to say, in all reality, am I living out of a healthy posture and an open heart? And what's amazing to me is we will say we trust God in so many areas. I mean, if it's a wedding, hey, we trust you with our marriage. If it's a funeral, hey, we trust you with our eternity. If it's a newborn child, hey, we trust you with our child. We're going to dedicate them to you. But when it comes to our finances, that's where we draw the line, which is really wild to me. We will trust God with our marriage, our children, and our eternity, but we won't trust Him with our finances. And I think if you can't trust God with your finances, well, then can you actually trust Him with your life? And I just think Jesus knew, hey, you can't separate your faith from your finances, and every spending decision is a spiritual decision. And this one area is going to constantly be attacking the hearts of people. And generosity, again, is what fends off the attacks against our heart. Yeah.
It's interesting how we will bring people into, like all those other areas you mentioned, we bring people into like marriage. Like, let me talk to you about how my marriage is doing. We'll bring people into like kids, raising kids, like, hey, we need your advice. We want you to like speak into this. But people are really not wanting you to know their finances or how they're spending their money or anything like that. And yet that we know that was the most talked about topic by Jesus in His ministry because of how important it is and how much of a hold it can truly have on our lives.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus tends to be the clearest in the areas we find to be the hardest. And that's a gift. That's Him being really, it's a tender mercy is what I would call it. But I think what you're saying is so spot on. And one, we have a hard time sharing. It's for a couple reasons. The ones who are doing it well are just really humble people sometimes. And I've struggled with this, where it's really hard to define that very thin line that runs between leading and bragging. And so I think it's really important to teach people about generosity, but even myself, I find a struggle of but I'm not going to talk about my generosity, and I'm not going to talk about all the ways in which God has just done remarkable things in our life as a result of our generosity, because there is a part of you that it feels like bragging, and that's a weird tension. I think a lot of people can relate to that. In addition to that, I think, and I want to unpack this slowly, I think poverty has become a strange form of self-righteousness in the church. And so you'll hear in really small microaggression kind of statements where individuals will say, well, I don't need a new car to be happy. And I don't need a nice house to be happy. And I don't need all those things. And in earshot are people who have the nice car, have the new house, and they're thinking to themselves, well, yeah, neither do I. But I made really wise decisions. I worked hard. I've stewarded my finances. In fact, I've been generous. God has provided in return. And for whatever reason, now I have some nice things, but they don't have me. And so I think sometimes the church misses it when it comes to people who have been blessed in financial means by ostracizing them with this kind of strange form of self-righteousness in terms of poverty. And I think we gotta stay balanced on both sides, where for whatever reason God blesses us in different ways, and we don't want to ostracize those among us who, for whatever reason, God has given favor to their resources. But
the Jesus tells a story about the parable where someone's given 10, someone's given 5, someone's given 2, but it's not. That wasn't a hierarchy ranking of who they are and their value. It was what they are able to steward. And then they were entrusted with it, and what they did with it is what mattered, not the amount that they got. And so in the end, it mattered more what they did with it, not And I'm always telling people, hey, be the type of person that heaven looks down upon your life and says, now we can trust that individual with more. I think God gravitates towards good stewards. And there's no doubt in my mind, you will sense heaven pressing in upon your life when you live in a posture of stewardship. And I just think it's a great concept. This has been really fun.
Super fun. You guys having fun out there? I've been having fun too.
Do you have any last challenge or question that you want to just pose to the life groups before they start talking?
Yeah. Well, I didn't have this thought until you asked the question, but I'm doing this workout, which just give it some time. Eventually, someone's going to see some results. But this trainer that it's this online deal, he talks about this concept of time intention. And he says to get the most out of a rep, you need more time intention. So sometimes it's slowing down the rep rather than just going through it fast. And I think spiritually, that applies to us as well. Sometimes you need more time in tension. A lot of times we're trying to resolve the tension just so we can move on and not address it. And a conversation like this, it comes with some tension. And for those of you who are willing to sit in that tension and allow it to have its work in your life, I think you will become stronger in your faith, and you will develop a spiritual stature. But you have to sit in the tension. I would just encourage you, you're going to have a conversation with your group, and chances are it's going to be vulnerable, and chances are it's going to be uncomfortable, but sit in that tension.
That's great. Thank you. All right, guys, enjoy the conversation at your place. We'll see you next week.